I'm Nathan Fox, one of the co-founders of LSAT Demon and the Thinking LSAT podcast and LSAT Demon Daily podcast. I see that Abigail is here from LSAT Demon. Hi, Abigail. Can everybody hear me okay? We all good? All right, awesome. Abigail is going to help me run the show. She's going to watch the chat for questions. You can also send her private questions if you'd like to talk about something kind of in the background. Different teachers teach advanced logical reasoning in slightly different ways. Some teachers are going to use polling. Some teachers are going to use cold calling. I tend to teach logical reasoning in a bit more of a top-down kind of a style. So we've got on our agenda for today a whole bunch of harder logical reasoning questions. The way we're going to do this is you're going to do questions on your own one at a time. Then I'm going to demonstrate that question and explain my thought process. And then you can ask whatever questions you want about that question before we move on to the next one. Fairly simple formula. The best way to learn LSAT logical reasoning is really just one question at a time and make sure you really get it before moving on to the next. So that's the idea behind this class. One thing I'd like you guys to commit to today, if you could do me a favor, is that I just really do want you to ask questions. If you don't tell me or if you don't tell Abigail what you don't understand, then it's just impossible for us to really help you. So you do need to speak up and ask questions. Could I get an amen on that? Yeah, we're doing it. All right. Beautiful. Thank you to those of you who are leaving your cameras on throughout the class. I'm a much better teacher if I can get a little bit of nonverbal feedback from seeing your faces. I understand that there's reasons why you might need to leave it off, or if you need to take a break or whatever, you can turn it off. It's no problem whatsoever. But most of the time, if you're going to be here and participating in an LSAT class, I would like you to leave your cameras on for me, please. All right. The agenda, I went to lsatdemon.com. I clicked on dashboard, I clicked on classes, and I see today's agenda right in front of me. This first question apparently is going to be about glutamate. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to work on it on your own, and then I'll come back and do an explanation. Thanks for being here.
Did I miss the question? Because I don't think I saw the question.
The agenda is in the chat. You can follow along on the agenda through that link. You can also go to lsatdemon.com, look at classes, and find the agendas that way. All right, I'm going to go ahead and dive into this first question. Give me just one sec here. Hold, please. Okay, it says, this is the first question on the agenda. It says from prep test 73, section 4, question 20. It says, in a recent study of stroke patients, those who exhibited continuing deterioration of nerve cells in the brain after the stroke also exhibited the highest levels of the protein glutamate in their blood. Okay, so what we have here is a correlation. We're only studying stroke patients, and in those stroke patients, we have a correlation, which just means two things that tend to happen together. We have a correlation between continuing deterioration of the nerve cells in the brain after the stroke and high levels of the protein glutamate in their blood. That's a correlation. One of the things that the LSAT does all the time is they conflate correlation and causation. So the second I see them cite that correlation, I'm already on guard for them to go the next step and say, oh, so it must be the glutamate in your blood that's causing you to have continued deterioration. Okay, or they could say, oh, so the continuing deterioration must be causing the glutamate in your blood. Both of those are equally flawed because two things can be correlated without being causally related at all. And even if they were causally related, how would you know which direction the causation was happening in? But these are all things that through training on LSAT logical reasoning, that will flash through your head in like 1 second. And I have some continuing students here. I see Roger and Tristan and Wendy and a bunch of people who've been with us for a while. And quick show of hands, how many of you, like after one sentence, you see that correlation and you're kind of like, don't do it, don't do it. Okay, that's part of reading comprehension, is predicting what you think you're gonna read next. So it goes on and it says, glutamate, which functions within nerve cells as a neurotransmitter, can kill surrounding nerve cells if it leaks from damaged or oxygen-starved nerve cells. And I think they're about to do it, right? It's like they're inching up to it. They're like, well, you know, the one thing can cause the other. Thus, they say, glutamate leaking from damaged or oxygen-starved nerve cells is a cause of long-term brain damage resulting from strokes. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. They believe that glutamate can kill these surrounding nerve cells. They've noticed a correlation between continuing nerve cell death in the brain and glutamate in the blood. And they go, okay, yeah, so it must be that the glutamate leaking from these nerve cells or whatever is a cause of the continued death of the cells. So it's a correlation, therefore causation argument. Which one of the following, if true, most strengthens the argument? Strengthen questions are probably, for my money, I think they're probably the most difficult type of question on LSAT logical reasoning. The reason why strengthen questions can sometimes be difficult is that the correct answer might be defending the argument against some attack that you haven't even thought of before. You know, like let's just do the answer choices, but A says, any neurotransmitter that leaks from a damaged or oxygen-starved nerve cell will damage surrounding nerve cells. About a quarter of you thought that that was a good answer. To me, that answer feels like a complete whiff. Uh, I don't see what other neurotransmitters have to do with anything. I mean, we were really only talking about the protein glutamate, which does have this neurotransmitter function. But so A is like all neurotransmitters, if they do leak from a damaged or an oxygen starved nerve cell, will damage surrounding nerve cells. But I already know that glutamate does that. I mean, I already know that glutamate can kill surrounding nerve cells when it leaks. So what does A do to help this conclusion? It does nothing. It's like, oh, other neurotransmitters could do this same thing. So what? The conclusion of this argument is glutamate is causing the brain damage. I read A actually might even be a weakener, because it's like, well, you know, it doesn't have to be glutamate. It could be any other neurotransmitter. Don't see how that's helping their conclusion. B says, stroke patients exhibit a wide variety of abnormal chemical levels in their blood. None of you thought that that was a good answer, and I'm glad, because it's not. How does that prove that glutamate is causing this damage? I just don't see how that's helping the argument. C says glutamate is the only neurotransmitter that leaks from oxygen starved or physically damaged nerve cells. So all C does is it says, oh, there's not other neurotransmitters floating around. Okay. The elimination of the possibility of other neurotransmitters leaking out and floating around, how does that prove that this correlation is actually a causal relationship? I just don't see it. It's like got all the right words, but the meaning of that answer choice doesn't do anything to help this argument. D, leakage from damaged or oxygen-starved nerve cells is the only possible source of glutamate in the blood. That strengthens the argument by tightening this relationship between, hey, we know that there's glutamate, and we know that glutamate can kill surrounding nerve cells if it leaks from damaged or oxygen-starved nerve cells. But did that glutamate come from damaged or oxygen starved nerve cells? It turns out to be, I think, a fairly difficult question, and your poll results indicate that you guys found it pretty difficult. There's a fairly wide range of answer choices here. D can be kind of hard to recognize because it's not like it proves the conclusion of the argument at all. What D really does is it makes an assumption of the argument explicit. I know that glutamate can have this effect if it does in fact leak from damaged nerve cells, blah, blah, blah. D says, yep, this glutamate did leak from damaged nerve cells. That's the only possible way it could have gotten there. And so it's not like a touchdown. This answer is like a 3.5 yard run up the middle. Okay, it's moving the ball forward slightly. And it is going to turn out to be correct because it's the only one that moves the ball forward even slightly. E, nerve cells can suffer enough damage to leak glutamate without being destroyed themselves. What? I don't see that moving the ball. The answer here turns out to be D because it makes a necessary assumption of the argument explicit. I think this is a good example of why strengthened questions can be really one of the hardest types of questions. So this was a great question to start with for an advanced logical reasoning class. All right, your time to shine. Questions, comments, what don't you understand? How can I help?
I have a question.
This is really great.
Go ahead.
So would you say, like, when it comes to answers, we want to avoid like already stated premises in the stimulus, or?
Yeah, because if it's already stated, it's not going to help the argument.
Okay.
On a strengthened question, yeah, totally. Yeah,
Well,
we need something that, if true, is going to help this argument. And that's just not going to help anything, right? If you're just restating something that was already explicit in the argument.
Okay.
Sorry, somebody else was talking to me. Who was that?
is Michael. Hi, Nathan.
Hi.
So the strengthening question we just went over, the answer supports the passage, correct? That's different from supported because the passage supports the answer.
Yes, you're
So that would
talking,
be a-
Michael. Yes, Michael, that's a very basic issue. That's a fundamental issue that you would talk about in our like logical reasoning foundations classes. The difference between a must be true question and a supported question. Sorry, the difference between a strengthening question and a supported question. It's a dramatic difference because a question that asks you for something that, if true, will support the argument is totally different from a question that says, which one is most supported by the argument? It's the difference between a top-down, we call it, or a bottom-up type of question. Abigail, I'm sure will dig up a link for us on top-down versus bottom-up. You can read that lesson and that'll tell you a lot more about that fundamental difference between these two major types of logical reasoning questions. Let's see. Corellis says the last sentence I found confusing to decipher. Can you give a breakdown of what the logic structure is in that last sentence? I don't know what you mean by that, Corellis. Breaking down the logic structure is not something that we really do here at LSAT Demon. The last sentence does say, thus, glutamate leaking from damaged or oxygen-starved nerve cells is a cause of long-term brain damage resulting from strokes. So it's a conclusion as indicated by the word thus, and it's saying that glutamate, which leaked from these damaged or oxygen-starved nerve cells specifically, not just glutamate that happens to be there for any other reason, but glutamate that came from damaged cells is a cause of the long-term brain damage resulting from strokes. It's a causal conclusion from the correlative evidence that they presented. It's basically the conclusion that I thought they were going to make after I read the very first sentence. Maggie, no. That correct answer there, D, was not a sufficient assumption of the argument. A sufficient assumption of the argument is going to prove the conclusion of the argument correct. D helps the argument. I do think that D is a necessary assumption of the argument. The author has to agree that D is true, but even if D is true, it doesn't prove that this brain damage has to be coming from the glutamate. All we have is a correlation and a proposed mechanism by which glutamate might be causing the damage, but you don't prove that that's actually how it happened when you add D to the argument. So that is not a sufficient assumption. All right. I see lots of comments and questions in the chat. That's great. I am going to leave it to Abigail to sort that stuff out. I want to go ahead and move on to our next logical reasoning question, which is about Spanish 101. All right, good luck. Definitely fill out the survey to let me know what answer choices you thought were good. You can pick multiples here, by the way. If you thought that a couple different answers were good, you can just select both of them. All right, go for it. Test 73, section 2, question 21 says, most of the students who took Spanish 101 at the university last semester attended every class session. Most is defined as more than half. Doesn't have to be all, but could be all. Could be as few as 51%, let's say, okay? One more than half, all the way up to and including all. So most has some wiggle room. Most of these students who took Spanish 101 at the university last semester attended every class session. It's possible that 49% of the students who took Spanish 101 at the university last semester never went to class once. Or it could be that everybody in the class went to every single class. Got to play with the possibilities when you see something like most. Anyway, however, it says each student who received a grade lower than B- missed at least one class session. Okay, well, do we know that anybody actually did receive a grade lower than B-? Maybe we do. This is a point where I'm not quite sure what they intended to say there. I do know that if you got a B-, or sorry, lower than a B-, so B- doesn't count actually. You have to get a C+ or worse. Anybody who got lower than a B- definitely missed at least one of the classes. But I know that most of the students attended every single class. Now, if you attended every single class, then you couldn't have gotten a grade lower than B-. You could have gotten a B- though. Important to think it through before you start messing around with the question and, God forbid, the answer choices. Which one of the following statements about the students who took Spanish 101 at the university last semester can be properly inferred from the information above? This is a must be true question. When it says which one can be properly inferred just means must be true. And they are asking you which one from the information above, which one can you go down and pick? So one of these answers is proven true by the passage that we just read. Contrast this with the previous question. A strengthened question is totally different, right? A strengthened question is one of these five, if it's true, is going to help the argument. A must be true question is one of these five is already forced to be true by the facts on the page. Critical that you get that distinction. Okay, so which one has to be true? A, at least some of the students who received a grade of A- or higher attended every class session. I don't know why that would have to be true. I don't even know if anybody got an A- or higher. As far as I know, everybody in the class could have got a B-. I just don't know why that would have to be true. I'm looking for something that I know for sure I can prove, okay? And if I have doubt, then that's not the answer. The record has to prove the answer that I'm going to pick here. Close isn't good enough. B, most, if not all, of the students who missed at least one class session received a grade lower than B-. No, I know that if you got a grade lower than B-, you had to miss at least one class, but it's totally possible that almost everybody just got an A in this class. Even the people who never went could have still got A's as far as I know. All I know is if you did get less than a B-, then you have to have missed a class. That's not the same thing as saying that if you miss a class, you have to get less than a B-. That's backward. C, most of the students received a grade higher than B-. Well, let me think about it. Oh boy, tricky. So most of the answers on the LSAT are just actually garbage. Like most of the wrong answers are wrong for multiple reasons. C is one of these rare wrong answers that and 31% of you thought that that was a good answer. So I feel you. The reason why C is wrong is that there's a difference between lower than B- and higher than B-. What about B- exactly? I do know that most of the people in the class didn't get lower than a B-, But if you get exactly a B minus, then you didn't get lower than a B minus. And it's possible that all these people who went to every class got a B minus exactly. And that's why C's wrong. And if you're like, oh, that's not fair, that's a technicality, then what do you think lawyers do? Like, that's exactly lawyer shit right there, okay? You have to read every word, you have to comprehend exactly what it means, nothing more, nothing less. It's an extremely lawyerly thing to do, to catch that and go, oh, gotcha. Nope, these people could have gotten exactly B minuses, therefore C does not have to be true. It's a loophole that makes C wrong. D, at least one student who received a grade of B minus or higher missed one or more class sessions. I have absolutely no evidence for that. I just don't. E, more than half of the students received a grade, there it is, of B minus or higher. Yeah, they didn't have to get higher than B minus, but they did have to get B minus or higher. That now includes B minus. And because the only people in the class who got less than a B minus missed a class, and because more than half the class attended every class session, therefore more than half the class, those who attended every class session, they did have to get a B minus or higher, but not higher than a B minus. So E's right and C's wrong. Tricky one. This is fun. I don't always teach the advanced logical reasoning class, but I do like working through, the hardest LR questions. You've got to learn to love this game. It's a silly little, I think, fun game to play. It's fun to be good at things. The better you get at it, the more fun it'll be. Any questions?
Yeah, Nathan, I have a question. So
Yeah.
I understood the logic on this one, but there's other advanced logical reasoning questions where they use two most statements, or they use an all and a most and a some. And I understand writing out the logic, but I know I want to go faster on this and not have to write out everything. Do you have any tips on how to combine two most statements? Or
Yeah, stop writing it out. We don't teach stuff like that here at LSAT DMN. If you see a teacher teaching too much of that stuff, like if I see a teacher using the whiteboard a lot on logical reasoning, I am going to have a talk with that teacher and train them on a better way to think about this stuff. Other LSAT classes, other LSAT books, and in fact, my class and Ben's class 5 years ago, we used to do a lot of that type of very dogmatic, overly technical, technically correct, but inefficient ways of teaching it and figuring it out. It's far better to just understand it in common sense terms. I could do a whole lesson on what happens when you combine two mosts together and the difference between most then all versus all then most. And it can be instructive to do some of that theory, but in the actual moment, I wouldn't be doing any of that theory at all. When in doubt, just don't diagram on the logical reasoning. No, I diagram like one question per year on the LSAT logical reasoning, and I give everybody full permission to never diagram any logical reasoning or reading comprehension question on the LSAT. It's just not helping you. It's hurting you at least as much as it's helping you. Just stop doing it. Is that okay, Jordan?
yeah.
And when you do encounter weird stuff that like mosts and alls and sums, and if you have a hard time thinking it through, by all means, ask us. We can work it through with you, and I might actually even use the whiteboard if necessary to teach it. But once it's taught, you shouldn't need the diagram anymore. All right. Any other questions? Abigail, how am I doing in the chat? Anything that has come up that I should address?
We are still getting like a few questions just about understanding the last line of the argument, like a couple people have asked, why isn't it possible for someone to have gone to all classes and still gotten a B minus?
Yes.
Or gotten lower than a B minus, I mean.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, the last sentence of that argument says, if you got a grade of lower than B minus, you had to miss a class. That's just the words on the page. That's what it says. We're not going to argue with that. That's kind of the game. Maybe what these people are not really understanding the game that we're playing, right? The question says, look at what the question says. It says, which one of the following statements can be properly inferred from the information above? What that means is you have to take the information above as gold-plated fact. We're not going to argue with these facts. We're going to find an answer that is supported by those facts, and we don't get to change the facts or argue with them at all. I see that Christina has a hand up. What can I do for you, Christina?
Yeah, thanks. I just had a question about this one. Is there a way, because it was a must be true question, that we could have tried to predict the answer before we read the answer choices?
Well, I did in a way, right? I combined the facts together and I thought about it for a second. I mean, I think I might have even said, we'd have to run the tape back on it, but I think I might have said, oh, so half the class at least got a B minus or higher. I mean, it is there for you to predict. Not all must be true questions are that predictable, but this one, yeah, if you combine those facts together, you can get there.
Okay.
Yep. Anything else? Okay, let's try this next one about Amanda and songwriting, apparently. Good luck. Test 73, section 4, question 21. The only songs Amanda has ever written are blues songs and punk rock songs. All right. Most punk rock songs involve no more than 3 chords. Right away, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to say, I get it that Amanda writes only blues and punk rock. And I understand that most punk rock songs involve no more than 3 chords. But that does not have to apply to Amanda's punk rock songs. That applies to most punk rock songs, but there can be 100 bazillion punk rock songs. More than half of them have no more than 3 chords. But Amanda's punk rock songs could be the exception to that rule, and her songs can have as many chords as they want. Very likely that something like that is going to turn out to be the right answer, because they are trying to lead you down the path of assuming that something that applies to most punk rock songs has to apply to Amanda's punk rock songs. Remember, most means 51% or more, which means that there's up to 49% of all punk rock songs that do not follow that rule. And there's plenty of room for Amanda to fit within that 49%. Goes on and it says, so if the next song Amanda writes is not a blues song, it probably will not involve more than 3 chords. And that's, you just don't get to make that conclusion. That's just not how this shit works. The rule most punk rock songs involve no more than 3 chords applies to the entire worldwide catalog of all punk rock songs ever written. And yeah, more than half of them have to have no more than 3 chords. But that does not mean that Amanda or anybody else who writes a new punk rock song can't have 3,000 different chords in that song. There's lots of room for exceptions. That's a problem with this logic. And the key is catch their bullshit when they do it. Ultimately, that's the game. Like half the time on LSAT logical reasoning, they're gonna reach some sort of a bogus conclusion. And your job as a lawyer is to catch them. Now they can ask me whatever they want because I've caught them at their shenanigans. Now the correct answer, now what are they going to say? They say, well, the reasoning in which one of the following arguments is most similar to that in the argument above. Nice. This is a parallel reasoning question or a matching pattern question, but there's a flaw in the given argument. There's a whole class of questions that we call matching flaw, where the question itself tells us that there's a flaw. And on those questions, we're explicitly told there's a flaw, go match the flaw. On a parallel reasoning question where they don't tell you that there's a flaw, there still can be a flaw like there is here. And we've caught it. And now this should be a fairly easy question because when we go into the answer choices, we're looking for a flawed argument that matches the flaw about Amanda. So my objection to the argument here is, hey, Amanda can easily be an exception to this rule about most punk rock songs, or the next song Amanda writes can easily be an exception to this rule about most punk rock songs. I'll know I have found the right answer when I find something to which I can make a similar objection. A says, the only pets the Gupta family has ever owned are fish and parrots. Most parrots are very noisy. So if the next pet the Gupta family owns is a parrot, it will probably be very noisy. Well, that does have one of the flaws that the given argument contained, because the Guptas might only buy parrots that have had their vocal cords removed, or some species of parrot that's not noisy, or whatever. that flaw is the same. But as I was reading A, I noticed an additional flaw, which is the only pets the Gupta family has ever owned are fish and parrots. But that doesn't mean that the next pet they buy would have to be a fish or a parrot. And that caused me to look back at the argument about Amanda. And I actually spotted an additional flaw in the argument about Amanda. It says the only songs she has ever written are blues and punk rock. But the next song she writes doesn't have to follow that rule. The next song that she writes could be a country song or a classical song or whatever. The argument about the Guptas in A doesn't contain that additional flaw, because with A, it says if the next thing they buy is a parrot. In order to match that flaw, A would have to have said if the next pet they buy is not a fish, and then reach that same conclusion. So A is flawed. It does have the, hey, hold on a second, you could be an exception to the most flaw. It has that. But it doesn't have the additional flaw that the given argument has. It's tricky, but the answer is not going to be A. Now I'm looking, and I didn't even predict this until I started looking at the answer choices, but now I'm looking for 2 flaws in the correct answer. It has to ignore the possibility that you can do something different in the future than what you've done in the past. And it also has to make that flaw of forgetting about the possibility of an exception to a most rule. Let's see. B says, most parrots are very noisy. The Gupta family has never owned any pets other than fish and parrots. So if the Gupta family has ever owned a noisy pet, that's a terrible answer, because that's backward looking instead of forward looking. I mean, in order to match this flaw that they made with Amanda, it needs to be a prediction about what's going to happen in the future, not some analysis about what's happened in the past. That was the least commonly chosen wrong answer. C says, all the pets the Gupta family has ever owned have been fish and parrots. Most parrots are very noisy. So any pet the Gupta family ever owns that is not a fish will probably be very noisy. I don't like that one because it's predicting all the pets that they might own in the future. The given argument just said the next song Amanda writes. C would be stronger. It would be a better fit if it said the next pet the Guptas own. I just don't think that's going to turn out to be the right answer. I think in real life, I would probably leave it open and then just hope for something better. D says, every pet the Gupta family has ever owned has been a fish or a parrot. Most parrots are very noisy. So if the next pet the Gupta family owns is not a parrot, it will probably not be very noisy. Overly complicated. I needed a positive prediction. I needed a most parrots are noisy, so if they don't buy a fish, their next pet will probably be noisy. D instead says most parrots are noisy, so if they don't buy a parrot, then their pet probably won't be noisy. It's just different and therefore out. E, the Gupta family has never owned any pets other than fish and parrots. Most parrots are very noisy, so the next pet the Gupta family owns will probably be very noisy if it is not a fish. That's perfect. I see some of you pointing out in the chat that E is a better version of C, which is totally true. I think most advanced students are probably going to narrow it down to E and C, and they're going to think that they're the same, and then they're going to really look at them closely, and they're going to go, oh, I get it. The conclusion in C is too broad. It goes farther, and it's making a prediction about all the pets they're ever going to own, whereas E, like the given argument, is about the next thing, not all future things. E does have both of the flaws that the argument contained, and that's why it is the answer to this parallel reasoning question. questions, comments? The better you get at the LSAT, the less often you're gonna narrow it down to 2 answers. Wrong answers are just garbage, and when you get good at the test, the wrong answers just, you can tell that they're garbage. But on this one, I do think that most high-level students are going to have both C and E, and then have to kind of compare those 2 together. That doesn't happen very often when you get really good, but it did happen here, I think, to many students. Raul. You're muted, Raul.
I didn't realize I was still muted.
No worries.
I was saying, I had a question, but it was answered in the explanation here. I saw the difference between my answer choice and the last one. So I guess we
Cool.
could carry on.
Yeah, I should point out, I suppose, Raul is talking about the full written explanation, which is already just sitting there in the daemon. I think we're up to like 90% coverage or something like that, maybe higher on LSAT logical reasoning questions. You should expect that there's going to be a full written explanation for every single logical reasoning question in the entire LSAT daemon. If you ever don't see a written explanation, just hit the ask button, and it'll end up getting into my work queue, and I will write you a full response. But yeah, you can use the written explanation to sort yourself out. Any other questions? Let me take a quick look at the chat. Seems like y'all are getting it. I definitely would refer you to that written explanation. I think I like doing the video explanations, and maybe they're fun. I think the written explanations are probably a more efficient way to really figure out why the right answers are right and why the wrong answers are wrong. You can read a lot faster than I can explain it out loud. So we'll continue to do these classes, of course, and we will continue to make videos. But on logical reasoning, if I was a student, I would be looking for those written explanations. All right. Next one is about yogurt. Good luck. Test 73, section 4, number 22, advertising tends to have a greater influence on consumer preferences regarding brands of yogurt than it does on consumer preferences regarding brands of milk. All right, if you say so. I don't know why that would be, but that seems to be a premise of their argument. Okay. Yet, it says, since large Co supermarket chain began advertising its store brand products, sales of its store brand milk increased more than sales of its store brand yogurt. What's it? Probably a paradox question. Yeah, it says, which one of the following, if true, most helps to resolve the apparent discrepancy described above? When you get good at LSAT logical reasoning, a lot of times you're going to be able to predict the question type, especially when it's a paradox question. The reason why I said it's probably a paradox question is that they seem to be giving me a bit of a paradox when they laid out those facts. On the one hand, advertising tends to have a greater influence on consumer preferences when it comes to yogurt than it does when it comes to milk. But on the other hand, large Co supermarket chain, what happened there? What was it again? Well, they began advertising their store brand products, and their sales of its store brand milk increased more than its sales of store brand yogurt. My first thought here is that it could be that the advertising actually caused the increase in store brand milk. When it said tends to in the first sentence, that means most of the time, which doesn't have to apply in every case. And so it is possible that large Co is just an exception to this rule. Why would they be an exception? I don't know. Something like nobody ever knew that large Co even had store brand milk. Everybody knew that large Co had store brand yogurt. When they started advertising their store brand products, people were like, well, normally you can't change my mind about milk, but I didn't even know that you have a store brand milk, so I guess maybe I'll start buying that. That could be what's going on here. There also could be just any other reason why the milk sales increased, you know. Maybe there was like a global, I don't know, like Oprah started talking about how milk is really good for people, and large Co at the same time was advertising their store brand products, but everybody just immediately went out and bought milk because Oprah said we should buy milk. And if that were the case, then this, you know, increase in milk sales would actually have nothing to do with the large Co advertising. It would be the effect of some other cause. Does that make sense? Okay. Which one of the following, if true, most helps to resolve the apparent discrepancy described above? I need to feel a click here. So I need an answer that satisfies my curiosity. If you're doing this right, you will get curious, or at least fake curiosity. Why is it that the large Co store brand milk increased more in sales than the large Co store brand yogurt once they started advertising, if generally it's easier to change people's preferences regarding yogurt than it is to change their preferences regarding milk? Why would that be? And the correct answer has to feel like I'm scratching that itch. Okay, the paradox is the itch, and the correct answer is going to satisfy that craving. You're gonna feel it. It's gonna go like, oh, got it. Okay, good. Thank God. All right. A says, there has recently been increased demand at large Co stores for the chain's own brand of yogurt, as well as for other brands of yogurt. Just doesn't feel like an explanation to me. Many of the correct answer or the incorrect answers on the LSAT, they're wrong because they just straight don't answer the question. We were asked to resolve a discrepancy. If I read A and I accept A as a fact, I still go, okay, but why did their store brand milk sales increase more than their store brand yogurt sales? In fact, A might even make it worse, because A is like, yeah, people really been coming into Large Co to buy their yogurt a lot lately, which makes me go, well, then when they started advertising their store brand products, why didn't that go up even more? So that just doesn't feel satisfying to me. B says, the typical shopper going to Large Co for the purpose of buying milk does not go with the intention of also buying yogurt. You know, buyers' intentions when they're walking into the store, I'm just not sure why that's even relevant. How many of their shoppers are going there with the intention of buying milk? Maybe nobody goes to the store with the intention of buying milk. Maybe people just go, I need groceries. You know, I'm out of Bud Light, so I got to go to the grocery store. And then while I'm there, I might actually buy other things besides alcohol. It's possible. It just B to me, it's not like, I just don't really feel like it's explaining anything. You know, and anyway, B is also about people who are going to buy milk and yogurt both, which just kind of seems to muddy the waters. I got to feel it, man. I got to get the click. C says, shoppers at Large Co tend to purchase the chain's own brand of dairy products more frequently than other brands of dairy products. That's not a difference between milk and yogurt. I need to explain why their milk sales went up more than their yogurt sales. C doesn't even pretend to do that. D, supermarkets throughout the entire nation have experienced a sharp decrease in sales of yogurt recently. That'll do it, y'all. My prediction was, what if Oprah was really hyping up milk and everybody just started buying milk? And so the increase in Large Co store brand milk is really just an effect of Oprah yelling about everybody needs to go out and buy milk right now. D is the exact same thing, except for it's anti-yogurt instead of pro-milk. What if Oprah was like, yogurt's bad for you, don't eat yogurt. You're not my friend anymore if you ever eat yogurt. And if everybody then was like, oh, I got to be Oprah's friend, I don't want to buy yogurt anymore, that could be why their store brand milk sales went up while their yogurt, store brand yogurt sales didn't go up that much. So on a paradox question, I will frequently predict multiple possible explanations. And my Oprah tells you to buy milk is actually very similar to D is Oprah tells you not to buy yogurt. And that's a totally fine explanation for what happened in this case. I feel the click. It's like the itch got scratched, and that's the answer. E says consumers tend to purchase store brands of yogurt, but purchase whatever brand of milk is least expensive. I have no idea whether Large Co store brand milk is more expensive or less expensive. I don't know. That can't possibly do anything to me. We'd have to add an assumption that the store brand milk is always less expensive. But even then, E also says consumers just straight tend to purchase store brands of yogurt, which makes it harder to understand why the store brand yogurt sales didn't go up. The only answer here that satisfies my curiosity is D. Alex, there is no trend in the first sentence of the stimulus. Advertising tends to means that more than half the time when advertising happens, this is what happens. But no, D does not cancel out that tendency at all. Matter of fact, D's not even about advertising, has nothing to do with advertising. Marcos says, I thought D was too obvious. Marcos, that is a thing that happens a lot when people get better at the LSAT. They are shocked to find out how easy the test actually is. And people are like, oh, that's too good to be true. Yeah, that's because that's the answer. I firmly believe that the LSAT is easy. That's our whole job, is to help you see how easy it really is. And when you think an answer is too obvious, that's probably the one. The right answer has to make perfect sense. The wrong answers don't make sense. Or they make sense, but they're exactly wrong. I mean, the wrong answers do not answer the question. The right answers do, and they make sense.
You think anyone can master this test, Nathan?
Do I think anyone can master the test? It depends on what you mean by master. Can everyone improve? Yes. Are we all going to score in the 90th percentile? No.
No. That is a very good answer, Nathan. I'm looking to improve. I'm looking to improve. That's all.
You're in the right place. Let's do this next one about Shayna. Test 73, section 4, question 23, problem. If Shayna congratulates Daniel on his award, she will misrepresent her true feelings. She does not want to congratulate this guy. All right. However, if Shayna does not congratulate Daniel, she will hurt his feelings. Oh, poor Daniel needs to be congratulated. All right, so Shayna is in a tough spot. She can either fail to congratulate Daniel, in which case Daniel will be sad, or she can congratulate Daniel, in which case she will lie. Here's a principle, which just means a rule or a fact or something, right? Okay, so here's like a rule of operation. One should never be insincere about one's feelings, except possibly where one believes that the person with whom one is speaking would prefer kindness to honesty. Obviously, what they're going for here is, how does this rule affect Shayna's behavior in this situation? It starts off with don't lie. One should never be insincere about one's feelings, which if that were the rule, then Shayna definitely should not congratulate Daniel. But there's an exception, okay? This exception, you're not required to follow the exception. It says except possibly when. So if Shayna decided to congratulate him and lie, it would have to be true that she believes that the person with whom she is speaking, which here is meant to mean Daniel, would prefer kindness to honesty. So here's the situation, and I'm doing all this before I mess with these answer choices, man. The answer choices are long and distracting and confusing. I'm not going to mess around with the answer choices until I'm ready to answer the question. Okay, I'm the boss of the test. I'm pausing here to think about Shayna's dilemma. Generally, she should not be insincere about her feelings. But if Shayna believes that Daniel would prefer kindness to honesty, then Shayna now has the option, not the duty, but the option to lie. The question, of course, is what does Shayna believe Daniel would prefer? Does she believe that he would prefer kindness to honesty? We don't know. If she did, she now has a choice. If she doesn't have that belief, then she doesn't have a choice. If she doesn't believe that, then she has to not congratulate him. Because if she did, she would be misrepresenting her own feelings, which the principle says you can't do. Except. So the question here is going to be, does the exception apply? And then when the exception applies, now it's back on Shayna. Hey, do whatever you want. The principle, if valid, most helps to justify the reasoning in which one of the following arguments concerning the problem. So one of these is basically going to say that. It's going to either say, if Shayna believes that Daniel would prefer kindness to honesty, then she has a choice. Or it's going to say, she does not believe that Daniel would prefer kindness to honesty, therefore she should not congratulate him. One of those two things is the answer. A, if Shayna congratulates Daniel, she will avoid hurting his feelings, so she should congratulate him. 20% of you thought that that was a good answer. Y'all, come on. You're basically ignoring the rule that was given to you. The rule was more complicated than that. The test is not ever testing like your morals. It's not testing whether you're a good person. It's testing your ability to follow rules on the page. It's testing your ability to comprehend and answer the questions that are being asked. They're not asking you for like, what would be the nice thing for Shayna to do? They're asking, how would Shayna follow this rule? And this rule just doesn't say, oh, if you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, then do whatever. That's not what it says. B, Daniel might prefer for Shayna to congratulate him, even if insincerely, rather than for her to express her true feelings. And so Shayna would be doing nothing wrong in insincerely congratulating Daniel. A whopping 43% of you liked that answer. And that is not a good answer because it's about what's actually in Daniel's head which is not what the rule was about. The rule didn't say if the person would prefer kindness to honesty. The rule said if Shayna believes that the person would prefer kindness to honesty. The reason why B is wrong, or one of the reasons why B is wrong, is because what's actually in Daniel's head is completely irrelevant. If you think that this has no application to law school, you are sorely mistaken. In criminal law, for sure, but also in tort law and in a million other areas of the law, there's always going to be discussion about what's in your head, what's in their head, what's in a hypothetical reasonable person's head. And that's all you're going to talk about for the whole first year of law school. So this is a very law school-ish question, and B's wrong because we don't care what's in Daniel's head. That's just not what the rule said. C, Shayna believes that kindness should be preferred to dishonesty. I don't give a shit about that either. It's not, the only thing that's relevant in Shayna's head, the only thing that's relevant is what does she believe Daniel would prefer? That's it. D, Daniel's feelings would be hurt. I don't care. Stop. I'm not going to read any more of that. I want, what does Shayna believe about what Daniel would prefer? E, Shayna has no opinion about whether Daniel would prefer kindness to honesty, so she should not congratulate him. And that is 100% proven to be true based on the facts on the page. The rule was don't lie unless, and the unless is you have to believe that they would prefer kindness to honesty. If you have no opinion about whether they would prefer kindness to honesty, then you do not believe that they would prefer kindness to honesty. And therefore the principal forces you not to be insincere about your feelings. Therefore she can't congratulate him. And that's the answer. And I predicted it before, way before I started messing around with these answer choices. The way we go fast on LSAT logical reasoning is by seriously disrespecting the wrong answer choices. I wrote a 600-page book that had a subtitle called Disrespecting the LSAT. And what I meant was you need to expect the arguments to be bullshit and call them on it. I also meant you need to expect the wrong answers to be bullshit and give them no respect whatsoever. When I read an answer like D, and it's like Daniel's feelings would be, I'm like, get out of here, goodbye. I was expecting you to be wrong. I know what I'm looking for. That's not giving me what I'm looking for. I do not need to read the rest of that answer. And that's how I'm able to go fast. I'm always going to go slower than you are on the argument itself. I'm always going to take a longer pause before I start messing with the answer choices. But I'm going to be done answering the question before you are, because it takes me no time to get through those wrong answers. All right, I don't think we're going to have time to do both of the questions that are remaining on the agenda, but we definitely have time to do this one about the concert hall. Go ahead and dive on in. when you see the word principle on the LSAT, you can basically just cross it out. It doesn't mean anything. It means thing, or literally cross it. I mean, I guess you don't want to probably write on your laptop, but if you just omit that word, it never changes the meaning of anything. Which one of the following principles is the same thing as which one of the following? So it doesn't do anything. It's just like which one of the following things. That's all it ever means on the LSAT. And there's no such thing as a principal question. Just delete if you ever see anything about principal questions. Rachel, you have a question?
Yeah, so I had asked about the principal wording on the last question, because it says problem and then it spelled it out with Shayna and Daniel, and then it said principal. So that was my question, was about the word principal there, where it's like an additional outside of the story or the problem, it's a rule. Like, so if we applied this,
No,
okay.
cross it out. It doesn't mean anything. Literally don't read that word. Like it just is nothing. It just is nothing. Which one of the following? That's all it ever means.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Test 73, section 2, question 24. A survey of a city's concert goers found that almost all of them were dissatisfied with the local concert hall. Almost all. I'm not sure exactly how much almost all means, but we could probably infer that it's got to be something like 80% or more. I don't think like 51% would be almost all. That wouldn't be like literally correct, I don't think. Anyway, people are unhappy. Most of these people are saying, almost all of them were saying that they are dissatisfied. A large majority of them expressed a strong preference for wider seats and better acoustics. Sure, wouldn't we all like that? And even though the survey respondents were told that the existing concert hall cannot feasibly be modified to provide these features, most of them opposed the idea of tearing down the existing structure and replacing it with a concert hall with wider seats and better acoustics. I have a feeling that this is a paradox question again. Yep, it's asking us to explain the apparent conflict. And I'm a baseball guy. Any of y'all baseball folks? You don't have to be a baseball guy to understand this point that I'm trying to make. Ever been to Wrigley Field? Ever been to Fenway Park? Those places suck, honestly. They're also awesome. The seats are tiny. The bathrooms are disgusting. Everything about it is basically terrible, except that, you know, Babe Ruth played there and it's just an incredible piece of history. Okay. So if you asked me, like, would you like bigger seats? Yeah. If you asked me, would you like to not have those giant trough style urinals? Yeah. But if you ask me, should we tear down Wrigley Field and rebuild a new modern ballpark? Hell no, because it's just part of the experience. So I can be, you know, dissatisfied with it while still thinking that it should be preserved. And that's not really a paradox to me. Which one of the following, if true, most helps to explain the apparent conflict in the concert goers' views as revealed by the survey? I'm looking for something that scratches the itch, right? One of these is going to make me understand, oh, I see, you're dissatisfied with it, but still, here's a good reason why you don't want it torn down. A says, before the survey questions were asked, the respondents were informed that the survey was sponsored by a group that advocates replacing the existing concert hall. That explains absolutely nothing to me. These people said that they're dissatisfied with the concert hall. They also said they don't want the concert hall to be replaced. Who's sponsoring the survey does not explain the paradoxical survey responses. B, most of the people who live in the vicinity of the existing concert hall do not want it to be torn down, also explains nothing. Why do most of the people who go to these concerts are dissatisfied? They don't like the seats, they don't like the acoustics, they wish those things were better. Nonetheless, when you say, hey, what if we tear it down and replace it with a better one? They say no. It's just not answering the question. So I think if you thought A or B were good, I think what you failed to do is just identify with the paradox in the first place. There's a mystery here, and the correct answer has to solve that mystery. And A and B are just not really answering. They're just not solving the mystery. C says, the city's construction industry will receive more economic benefit from the construction of a new concert hall than from renovations to the existing concert hall. What? How does that explain the survey results? D, a well-publicized plan is being considered by the city government that would convert the existing concert hall into a public auditorium and build a new concert hall nearby. Not at all what I predicted. But if D's true, people filling out the survey might go, yeah, the seats are terrible. Yeah, the acoustics are terrible. But do I want it torn down and replaced with a new thing? No, because there's this plan to build a new thing next door and still use the existing concert hall. And that's a perfectly satisfying explanation. That's going to turn out to be the answer. E says many popular singers and musicians who currently do not hold concerts in the city would begin to hold concerts if there were a new concert hall being built. Well, then that actually makes the paradox worse. Like, why are people, they're not satisfied. You know, the weekend is not going to come if we don't build a new stadium or whatever. And but nonetheless, people don't want the new stadium or the new concert hall. Why? D is the only one that explains it, so the answer is D. Any questions about that one?
I chose E.
You chose E? Okay, it doesn't answer the question.
It does. It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay, we are out of time formally, but I don't think there's anything on the calendar. And I could do one more question. Actually, let's talk to Raul first, and then maybe we'll knock out this last question on the agenda.
Hey, Nathan. Just going back to question A, I think I did I had that as one of the possible answers.
You said A?
Yeah, as one of the possible answers, yes.
How does that explain the paradox?
So,
hold on. The burden is on you to explain why A solves this mystery. The mystery is the same people who don't like the seats and don't like the acoustics also don't want the thing torn down and replaced with a new facility. That's the mystery. How does A explain that mystery?
I guess now looking at it, just says that they didn't want that they were going to have it replaced, but it didn't explain why they didn't want it replaced. So I guess now I'm looking at it. D obviously is a better answer, but I was just a little conflicted because you know, it would seem as if you know, having some sponsorship would kind of influence, you know, if they were opposed. And I guess I drew an assumption there, but if they were opposed to these, yeah, it says, you know, the survey was sponsored by a group that was, you know, was looking to advocate the tearing down of the existing.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at B, not A.
Yeah.
So A is about who sponsored the survey. How does that explain the paradoxical results within the survey? How would the fact that this was sponsored by anybody, I don't care who it's sponsored by, people that are pro a new stadium or people that are anti a new stadium, how does that resolve the paradox? There's a conflict in the survey results. People are like, I hate it, don't tear it down.
I think it's the assumption that I drew that, you know, they had they were opposed to the sponsorship, and I think that's where I got that. But I see where D is more, you know, more on the money.
Yeah, answer choices need to speak for themselves. You know, you don't get to just add in a whole bunch of other assumptions into A.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I guess with A, you're like, oh, well, you know, they don't like these people who are sponsoring the survey. So but it also doesn't explain anything. Like, even if they
No.
did not like these people, well, then why aren't they like, I love the seats, I love the acoustics, don't tear it down. Instead, they're like, the seats are too small, the acoustics suck, don't tear it down. Which just makes no sense. Even if they do hate these people, it makes no sense.
Wow.
Got it?
Yep. Yep.
Cool. Thank you for your question. Y'all want to do one more? Yeah. All right. If you got to go, you got to go. No big deal. But I will go ahead and just do this last question. It is about genetically engineered crops. Have fun. Before I forget, I will be back tonight, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, for my October 2021 LSAT study group. That's a free class. All y'all are welcome to go ahead and register for that, and I'll see you this evening. I also have my normal Thursday night class. That's 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. That's for premium or live subscribers. It's a 2-hour, all levels, all topics LSAT class that I teach every Thursday night. And then the last thing that I do tonight is called Double Black Diamond. That's a bit of a smaller group because it's expert level questions. The hardest stuff that we encounter in any of our classes throughout the week. It's a class for live subscribers only. Double Black Diamond, that's at 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern. So 3 different classes, 4 full hours of me this evening, if you're so inclined. Hope to see you there. All right, I'm gonna do this test 73. Test 73, section 4, number 26. A farmer says crops genetically engineered to produce toxins that enable them to resist insect pests do not need to be sprayed with insecticides. You still could if you wanted to, but you don't have to, you don't need to. Since excessive spraying of insecticides has harmed wildlife populations near croplands, using such genetically engineered crops more widely is likely to help wildlife populations to recover. Maybe, but my job is not to agree. My job is to disagree. I'm always looking for ways in which these arguments might fail. And I have two of them right off the top of my head. The first is, what if these wildlife populations are already so decimated by the spraying of pesticides that even if we totally switch to these GMOs and we stop spraying insecticides, that doesn't mean that the wildlife has to recover. Two, and this is a totally different attack, what if the GMO plants themselves are somehow bad for the wildlife populations? Like, I remember this was 10 or 20 years ago. I remember the whole like scare about, you know, Monsanto corn. And it's like, hey, you know, this corn, you can only grow it if you use the Monsanto seeds or whatever. And then what if that characteristic somehow like infects all the other corn in the world, and next thing you know, it might be impossible to grow any corn without without paying Monsanto. Something along those lines could be a pretty good attack here, where it's like, well, no, you see, the GMO crops actually are bad for the local wildlife. Yeah, spraying pesticides bad, but the GMO crops themselves might be even worse. I could go on. I could sit here all day and come up with 100 different ways that this argument might fail. But with one or two, you know, arrows in the quiver, I now can look at the question and the answer choices. The question here says, which one of the following is an assumption the farmer's argument requires? That's a necessary assumption question. I believe it's the first one we've had today. Necessary assumption questions are about finding an answer that the author must agree with. Nothing more than that. Forget about assumption negation or any other weird techniques that you might have heard about before on necessary assumption questions. All you need to ask is, which one does the author have to agree with? A, use of the crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests in place of crops that have been sprayed with insecticides will cause less harm to wildlife populations. Well, yeah. How does the author not agree with that? It's almost like A is just restating the conclusion of the argument. It is one thing on necessary assumption questions. If it feels like that's exactly what they said, then that's the answer. It's simple. It's one of those like, oh, it's too good to be true. Well, yeah, that's because it's the answer. But this author believes that GMO crops are going to be better for the wildlife. So this author must agree that the GMO crops are going to cause less harm than, you know, the existing crops and spraying the pesticides. My objection was, what if the GMO crops are really bad for the for wildlife? And that's exactly why A is the answer. The author has to agree that these crops don't themselves cause damage, and the answer is going to be A. I just can't possibly see the author disagreeing with that. So the answer has got to be A. B says wildlife populations that have been harmed by the excessive spraying of insecticides on croplands are likely to recover if the amount of insecticides sprayed on those croplands is reduced even slightly. And it's the last two words there, the even slightly, that make that 100% wrong. That was a damn good answer. If it had stopped before it said even slightly, then it would be correct. The author does have to agree with that. Their whole argument is, hey, if if we get rid of these pesticides, then the wildlife's going to do better. So they agree that if you reduce the pesticides all the way, then the wildlife is going to get better. But the even slightly there, the author could easily go, oh no, a 5% reduction ain't going to do it. The author might think that a 95% reduction wouldn't be enough to do it. The author said that if we get rid of the pesticides, that'll do it. The even slightly makes B 100% wrong. C, crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests are never sprayed with insecticides that harm wildlife populations. The author doesn't have to agree with that. The author said you don't need to spray these crops with insecticides. But maybe you do spray your crops with insecticides just because, I don't know. You might not know that you are growing GMO crops. What if you're really bad at farming? I mean, all I need is any exception to see like one farmer who's dumb. That one dumb farmer who keeps spraying insecticides even on GMO crops would make C false. The author does not have to agree that C is true. D, the use of crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests is no more costly to farmers. The author doesn't have to agree with that. The author would be like, oh no, it's quite a bit more costly. You're going to be a slave to Monsanto for the rest of your life because you're only going to be able to buy their seeds and grow their shit. And it could be way more expensive than spraying the pesticides as far as we know. Cost is just irrelevant. It's not part of the argument. E, if a wider use of certain crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests is likely to help at least some wildlife populations to recover, then it's likely to have that effect only because its use will prevent excessive and ineffective spraying of insecticides on croplands. The author doesn't have to agree with that. The author is a fan of these GMO crops. There might be 100 other reasons why the GMO crops are better for the local wildlife. The author that would be good for the author if there were other reasons why the GMO crops are good besides the reduction in pesticides. A is the only one that the author has to agree with, therefore the answer is A. All right, y'all. Thank you very much. That was a delightful class. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for all of your good questions. Thank you, Abigail, for your help. We can go off the record here I have a few minutes. I'm going to stop recording and then we can just chat if you would like.